Hey, what's up? Welcome back, subscribers. It's your girl Sab here. I've got a guest for today's episode of Suffering of Silence for National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I have.
Xavier.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Xavier.
Yes.
I know that this is totally strange. I know it's out of your comfort zone because even for me, sometimes it is too. I know we had some like topics to talk about, and I appreciate you actually going through and like doing some research
Mhm.
and like putting stuff together. Because I feel like I don't want to just like always just share stories and experiences, although like it's great and it's great to hear from other people and like their own experiences too. But like kind of knowing the facts of things is also super helpful. So I think based off of some of the topics that we talked about, and we don't have to just stick to that,
Mhm.
but I guess in your experience and like the things that you personally know, like what are some of the resources like you've learned about like how you can help women?
Yes. And previously speaking, for women that experience domestic violence, so I specifically work in the homeless sector for social services, and with that, sometimes it's working. We have like obviously just regular homeless shelters, but there's also like DV shelters.
Mhm.
And in terms of how we operate is a little different, mostly just for the safety and security of the people that are residing um, in domestic shelters.
Mhm.
One of the main things is like that confidentiality, and there's different ways we go about that. And that way, there's just more level of security in terms of that information. Because one thing that's definitely not wanted is for your abuser to find you and then show up at the place where you try to find safety at.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's just different, I guess, in terms of like case management, there's different ways we help them, I guess, plan for like, because also the domestic violence shelters are temporary stays, just
Mhm.
because there's so many people experiencing it, and there's not enough capacity in these shelters for the need that is needed,
Right.
really. And some of that can look like counseling, safety planning, um, more transition towards like even like moving to like whole different counties and really just planning
Mm.
for the uproot that is fleeing domestic violence.
Yeah.
So those are two different things there.
How long are they typically like allowed to stay, or is it just like kind of however long that they need it?
I think each agency has their own different, I guess, time range they can stay there. Some are like you can stay there as long as you need to. Some it's like maybe like 90 to 180 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
it can definitely range a good amount. So especially for different programs, like there's like transitional living programs where some of those are like a year-long program.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also different grants for like rapid housing for specifically for DV victims.
Okay, that's interesting. I honestly didn't even think that it'd be that long of a time frame. Like 90 to 180 days is actually a long time. I was thinking like a week or two.
Yeah.
Like my only experience actually, I mean, of course, like I had personal experiences as well going through some of the DV like places here in Milwaukee. Um, and I've never actually like stayed there personally, but I've had to deal with like there was only one occasion in which I had to deal with like the legalities of being in a domestic violence situation. And it was like because of my stalker, like I had to go there to speak to like an advocate
Mhm.
and they would like help walk me through the process of like pressing charges and whatever else comes with this entirety of being in a situation like that. And obviously like you don't I think one thing that we have to also keep in mind that like we don't control whether they decide that they want to press charges or not, like that is totally up to the DA's office. And even if the charges are even brought in front of a DA, it doesn't mean that they would even execute on it. And that's unfortunate for women who might actually need it, or actually want to proceed with it. And I hate to say that like I wasn't one of those people that actually went as far as like pressing charges, and I feel really like because I almost feel like I'm failing those people who are going through the experience and actually want to proceed with pressing charges, because sometimes it can just be looked upon as like someone who's just kind of bending the law in
Mhm.
their own ways. But for me, I just personally didn't want to open up that whole thing and go through a court process, because at the same time I also didn't want to see them go through, like, I didn't want them to, it sounds stupid,
Yeah,
but of course, like, I was still in that mindset of like I didn't want them to have to go through suffering the, being spending time in prison, or spending any time legally paying for what they did.
yeah,
And I think that's a t I mean, it's probably the most unsafe mindset to have as, like, someone who's
yeah,
experiencing domestic violence, but it's definitely just it just was how it worked out for me. And actually someone that I had on the show, well, I haven't put out the episode yet, but the person that I spoke to last week, she actually shares her experience actually going through the legal process of pressing charges on the person that, kind of put her through this experience and situation. And it's kind of interesting to hear her point of view, and like to know, to even just personally know someone who has actually gone through with pressing charges is it's pretty interesting, because obviously, like, around me I have tons of, well, it sounds terrible to say, but I do know quite a few people who have experienced domestic violence and have done nothing about it, just kind
mhm.
of like got themselves out of the situation and moved on. But um or tried to move on, I should say. But yeah, seeing it in a different perspective is super helpful. um would you, I mean, I guess, aside from your professional stance, like, personally, if you knew someone that was experiencing domestic violence, would you encourage them to, like, speak up and go through the legal actions of the fighting the fight?
I think it's interesting. I think I wanted to, I guess, more or less inform you in that it's not a bad thing to not necessarily take that legal action because I think the big word to say would be like trauma. Like
Yeah.
it's experience on both sides in
Yeah.
terms of like, even if you do a pre-like process, that person's experiencing that, but then you're also experiencing all the damage they've caused you. And a lot of it can be like concerning for your safety as well. Like if I do proceed with legal action, is this person going to harm me? And that could be like an instant thought for somebody that's experienced domestic violence.
Mm,
And I think it's something you have to take slowly. Like there's a lot of like because
understandable.
different ways of like counseling of like, okay, if I do end up doing this, how am I going to keep myself safe? If you have kids, how am I going to keep my kids safe?
Yeah.
How do I keep this person even from contacting me? Because I know even with legal action, sometimes there are people or abusers that take that extra step and they won't. If you have no contact order, they will not abide by that. They're still going to find a way to contact you. They're going to use somebody else's phone, find your cousin's email, whoever, like
Yeah.
whichever way they can contact you. Sometimes they take that extra step, and that is very uncomfortable, unsafe,
Yeah.
all these feelings of stress. So I think it really lies on how you feel in your situation, but also how safe do you feel with proceeding with that.
That's a perfect take, honestly, like, um I guess even being a person who's gone through it, I didn't even think about the fact that, like, you have to literally consider the fact that, like, you could be very much unsafe, um, by pressing charges, or, doing a testimony against this person, because and also, like, I guess one thing for me is, especially after talking to this person last week, um, she has kids, and, like, she has a child with her abuser, and with having a child with the abuser, it makes it a lot more difficult, not only to, like, co-parent, but also, having been in a co-parenting situation that's like, like, this person's with you all the time, and, like, this person is a part of your life in such a major way, to co-parent to go from co-parenting with that person and then having to balance that on your own,
Hmm.
and trying to get through all of this all of this situation in a domestic violence, scenario, like, I can only imagine how bad that can be. Like that is a lot of pressure and a lot of change, drastic changes all at once.
Yeah.
Um, and like I know it's totally hard to I absolutely recognize that it's absolutely not the easiest thing to do leaving a situation like that. So I mean, I think statistics say like it takes like 7 times for a victim. I hate saying that word. I hate labeling people as that, but it takes them 7 times to actually leave a domestic violence situation. And I personally, I mean, of course, like I've seen people in my life go through it. And especially after going through my own experiences, I try not to judge them for that.
Mhm.
But, sometimes it does get frustrating to watch them go back over and over and over after you have just put yourself out there to really like help them and they're just not sick of it, like they're just not over it yet. Um but like I think it's always heartbreaking, but I try to like even before I was in, like, my situations, like, I would watch my sister go through it a lot, and she went through like, some terrible, terrible times, like and I'll be respectful and mindful of her of sharing her experiences, but, like, watching her go through that was hard, like, she just it took her a very long time to leave that situation. Um, and I would honestly judge her because she didn't leave the situation because, like, she felt like she deserved well, I mean, obviously she felt somewhat as if she deserved better, but she was just, like, sick of it, and it wasn't because, like, she just wanted to, like, focus on herself and, like, get herself together. Like, she just left the situation because she found someone that would be able to help her get out of that situation,
Mhm.
and I just and then she goes back into the same cycle,
Yeah.
and I hate seeing her go through that. And like she continues to kind of experience the same thing. I feel like I mean, I don't know what's going on in their relationship right now, but I just I see certain things and I just like it just immediately like becomes a red flag to me like and that actually goes for almost all of my friends and family like when I watch them interact with their significant others like I get really nervous because like, my traumatized brain just literally is like, "Abuser, abuser,
Yeah.
abuser." And, like, it sucks because I'm like, I don't wanna feel that way, but I do, and it, like, scares me, and I try not to do that. I'm trying my best to not do that, but it's very hard to, like, unlearn what you've already
Mhm.
what you're so conditioned to know.
Yeah.
And I I I want to like, I wish I could be more active in actual, like, domestic violent, shelters and, like, I guess essentially in that space,
Mhm.
but I'm so scared that I won't be able to, like, handle it because my traumatized brain is just gonna be like I'm gonna get frustrated or overwhelmed with seeing people go back to the same situations, you know?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think so I think you're pretty clear on the fact that you only work with women, right? For your
Not necess I work both with women and men,
Oh,
so
okay.
it's a good mixture because homelessness is like affects a lot of people. It's
Absolutely.
men, women, families. It's a lot,
Yeah.
and like you were saying earlier, with like that almost that secondary trauma. Like if you do go in these spaces, a lot of their trauma becomes yours in a sense where it's like, especially when you see them, like you said, go back to the abuser, or sometimes I know there's a lot of different barriers when you're experiencing homelessness, whether it's like evictions,
Mm,
background. A lot of those things can have an impact on how you're able to even like get back and find your own space for yourself.
right.
And so a lot of times you see them like not being able to find a permanent housing solution, and they end up on the street or they go back to the abuser, and that's frustrating, like you
Yeah.
said, to see. Um, and one of the things that I've really like, I guess, as I've gone further in my time working with, I guess, both DV victims and also just the homeless population, is it's difficult. to get out of these situations when you're experiencing so much. Because there's also some aspects of your safety, but then a lot of times I think it's close to like 90% of the homeless population experience one form of like mental health, whether
Mm,
it's like depression, anxiety, some of it's PTSD, schizophrenia, personality disorders. Like there's so many different things that could be impacting, and
yeah.
they're all just trying to find a safe place to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a definite major role for sure. Like,
Mhm.
I guess I had never, I guess I had never thought about like kind of well, obviously talking to the advocates kind of help you backtrack to where things really started. Like not that you put yourself in the
Mhm.
situation, but what kind of leads you there? Like what things have happened to you that kind of led you to where you're in a situation like domestic violence
Mhm.
or just homelessness even. Like how could that really happen? And no one really factors those things in, like how they could look at someone and you could look at someone and not even know that they have a mental illness, you know? Like that's the hardest part of it. And or realize that someone's going through um experiencing things like even as children. Like I've had people who reach out and like uh they hear my story like on the podcast and they're like cuz and it's also just interesting in general because I've been gone for like 10 years and no one's like heard from me for so long, and when they finally see me it's like they just are crash course on my life in the last 10 years. I've been, you know, going through all of this stuff and like they're listening to it on the podcast and they're like, you know, I never would have thought that you experienced that you would ever be in a situation like that, which of course, you know, they also realize that DV is not labeled for any specific person. Like it happens, it can happen to anyone. But they also when they hear and learn about like experiences I went through as in my childhood, then they start to also think like, wow, like I never would have thought that about you. Like, you know, they're very shocked at some of the stuff that has happened in my life. Um, and that's kind of I mean, that's obviously the reason like I wanted to share my story. Um, Not only for awareness, but also to kind of show like it can happen to anyone. Like you could literally live whatever you consider a perfect life and there could be so much more happening behind the doors behind closed doors, and like no one is ever going to know unless you speak up. And I totally respect people who don't like choose to speak up about these things because I know it's not safe for everyone to do that, but also it's just not what other people want to do.
Mhm.
um but you know, I do encourage people to try to speak up about it or just talk to someone about it because it's a safer space to have someone that can help you just process what you're going through than to not.
Yeah.
Because even, you know, I tried doing some of like the little therapy sessions that they have for you at like the shelters and whatnot, but you know, at that point in time, I wasn't taking it serious. Like, you know, I
Yeah.
wasn't like, I'm like, you know, it doesn't even matter. Who cares? Like, this is just, I just have to go through this because this is just what, is required in this process, in this legal process.
Yeah.
It's not because I actually feel like I need this, you know?
Mhm.
And when I finally chose to go to therapy, I did it in secret,
Mhm.
behind my abuser's back, and like because that was the only way I could. Um, Otherwise, I knew that there were like repercussions to it.
Yeah.
And I started it during like COVID because I mean it was all virtual at that point,
Mhm.
and even just doing that, like I was the I had to find any reason to escape, like to leave the house, and I would just be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go to my mom's house or something," and I would literally park somewhere and take
Mhm.
my call with my therapist just to make sure, like, I was processing what was going on, like, you know, because at some point I was just like, "I know I'm not going crazy, like, I'm being gaslit, am I not?" Like,
Mhm.
there's no way that I feel this infuriated about a situation, and he's telling me that it's not a big deal, you know, and it's like recognizing the signs is so hard. Like, I think talking to other people who have experienced DV, I've realized that sometimes they didn't
Yeah,
even realize that they were going through it. Even, you know, I think also some people think like I think some of the people I've talked to, they feel like, "Oh, you might have, you probably went through it worse than me." And I'm like, "It doesn't matter like if it's
yeah.
been worse or not. Like there is no comparison. It's just like you went through it and you probably just don't realize that you went through it. But also, trauma brain is a real thing. Like you literally it's like a cloud that just blurs your entire memory of what was going on during that time.
Hmm. And it's just reminded me, like, it's the first step is always like acknowledging it, like, because there's so many people that will experience this and just see it as normal.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said earlier is like how do people get into these situations? Because
Yeah.
a lot of these situations start up normal, like where okay, this person you go like this somebody and it starts to lead to something else,
Yeah.
something more serious, and this person gives that pretty much almost like sometimes fantasy of they love you, and
Mhm.
I think that's what desires that all humans have. It's just to feel loved,
Yeah.
and that gets taken advantage of at a certain point,
Yeah.
and it flips where it's like okay, this person loved me, but he's also like whether it's physically, emotionally, socially harming you.
Mhm.
And it just slowly and slowly like more or less almost like becomes that relationship.
Yeah.
And when you talk about like red flags, green flags in relationships, once you've like experienced like a bad relationship for so long, it becomes that normality. And then once somebody actually shows you like a green flag in a healthy relationship, that's like off-putting.
Yeah.
But people do not necessarily like that trauma brain that you speak of. That's weird. Like they
Yeah.
don't they want to stick with what they know and that normality that is sometimes a DV.
And everything feels like a red flag to me. Like that's my problem. I don't know if you've ever looked into like I don't know if it would even help you in the position that you're in at all, but have you ever looked into like attachment style theory?
Yes, a little bit.
I was like so obsessed with it. Like I mean I still obsess over it a little bit. I sort of do, but I hyperfixated on it last year for a really long time because I was going through a really bad breakup at the time. Or at least it just hit me really badly because it was like honestly one of the best relationships I had had, like romantically. For once I wasn't being abused and like, he actually showed me what like good love could be like. And so it was really hard to like end that relationship, but it needed to happen for sure. And so the only way I knew to cope through it because every other relationship I had been in it ended because I reached my boiling point and I was just sick of it all, and I would leave, and this time it didn't feel like a solidified end, so I just kinda dove headfirst into, like, attachment style theory, and I I'm starting to notice, and now I don't wanna label anyone, but, like, a lot of the people that I've talked to that experience, like, domestic violence in their life, whether it's in a romantic relationship or even just, like, at home at and as in their childhood, a majority of them have a fearful avoidant attachment, and, because there's a couple different ones. There's the avoidant attachment, the avoidant attachment, there's the, my god, anxious attachment and then fearful avoidant, which is really just like a mix of both.
Hmm.
And of course, like just because you're anxious or you're avoidant, it doesn't mean that you're always just that one way in a relationship. But I've recognized that a lot of the people that I've met and talked to, they certainly have identified more as fearful avoidant. And obviously, depending on the situation, like they are typically like they'll handle situations very differently depending on what the situation is and even the person that they're dealing with. But I feel like it also goes into the way you respond to trauma. Like I think I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there's like 4 different responses to trauma, like, when abuse is happening, like, you either it's fight, flight, there's fawn, and then there's another one. Um, I don't know why it's blanking in my head right now, but I feel like when you're stuck in, like, that drama triangle,
Mm-hmm.
and you're always going through something in the drama triangle, like, you are responding in for me personally, I've responded in almost every single way, and, for a long time to feel like I was safe and to know that I wasn't going to get hurt, I would always respond in a fawn response, which is just to, like, oh, just try to satisfy their need, like, satisfy them, and, like, it's almost like a manipulation tactic, and I feel like that also made sense with my attachment style where, like, I would I would typically be very avoidant in relationships, but when it came to, like, my abusive relationship, like, I was super anxious because he would poke that part of me, and he would bring out the part of me that, like, would be more people pleasing, and most of the time, a fearful avoidant is fearful avoidant because there's always so much going on around them, like, as a child, like, I don't know if my feelings are gonna get ignored or if, like, my feelings are not gonna get ignored, but Imma get my ass smacked, like, like, something, I mean, maybe more drastic than that would even happen, so
Mm-hmm.
it kinda carries into just the way I interact with the world in general, and, like, it's difficult to it's difficult to still navigate situations, I think, for myself personally, like, I don't know I don't know how, like I don't trust I just have a hard time trusting things.
Yeah.
So it's like your brain is just, like, always either super anxious or you totally just, even when you're avoidant even when you're going in a more avoidant mindset, like, you're actually you're still anxious, you're just kinda dissociating from the situation because you don't know what's going on, or you don't know what's going to happen next. So it all becomes like, I've just noticed, at least from the people I've talked to, is that our attachment styles are usually fearful avoidant. And I feel like understanding that about yourself can help a lot with, like, not allowing yourself into certain situations or certain spaces that make you feel one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
But also trying to work through it, of course, like, can't avoid everything forever,
Yeah.
but it's something that I feel like has helped me a lot with, I guess just trauma my own trauma, but also in what I'm doing now, like, helping people work through their own trauma as well.
One of the things you made me think of just now was like the word control and how in relation to domestic violence. And one thing that I've always like just known for like DV is like how abuser pretty much tries to control the relationship. And so I'm just go through the line. So like socially, sometimes that's pulling you away from your friends, pulling you away from your family, pretty much any social connection. So then they have that control and power of who you spend your time with,
Mhm,
and who you pay more your attention to. Is it where you're pretty much to the point of isolated with this one other person because they've just are trying to control that relationship, which is unhealthy. Um, Emotionally, sometimes a way that they would handle control is maybe if there's like an argument or something that could be like yelling, shouting, cursing at you all these ways, but then coming back to say like, "Oh no, I was just in a mood. I was just upset. I really love you." Love bombing, all this other stuff, and really make you think like, "Am I crazy that he did this to me, or does he actually love me?" And that's very manipulative and unhealthy in that way too. And lastly, like physically, they're some type of way and they just cause you bodily harm, and that's just a way to make you fearful in general. So then you're scared of any talk back or confrontation with that person. So they're like, okay, if I do something actually about this, they're just going to continue to hurt me.
yeah.
And that's like three different ways of how people are controlling in those relationships in terms of relation to domestic violence, and that's how you get to that.
I think also people forget that physical can it doesn't mean that they're like they're literally touching you, like it could also mean throwing things,
Oh yeah.
like not even just at you, but even just like throwing things in general, like when they're angry or when their emotions are really high.
Hmm.
Because even as like I've experienced that as well, like even in a like it doesn't even have to be a romantic relationship, you know, like I mean that happened a lot in my household. Like my dad would throw shit all the time when he's pissed off or like when he's upset, and it may not hit anyone, and it's not like he's throwing it at anyone specific, but that's really abusive and toxic
Yeah.
too.
Making that environment unsafe.
Exactly, exactly, and I think people forget that all the time is like it doesn't actually have to hit you
Um,
or
Sometimes it could just be that person has a weapon, like,
yeah,
and they make it known to you, like, hey, I have this gun, I have this knife, I have this bat. Anything that pretty much has that negative connotation of like, okay, this person can actually cause harm to me.
yeah, or even for me like some of the things I went through was my ex would he would douse me in like in stuff like vinegar or Hennessy. Like he poured a whole like I came home for my lunch break and he poured an entire bottle of Hennessy on me because he was pissed off at me.
Mm,
That's physical abuse, even though he didn't touch me. And that's always this thing is like, I've never touched you, like I've never put my hands on you, but you're being abusive either way. Like,
mhm,
and people don't recognize or realize those things because those are tactics, those are small things in which they're not small things, but those are actions that are making you afraid of him. Like,
mhm.
but yeah, I think being mindful of small stuff like that and like also the point that you made earlier was about like when they would start off like moving. I feel like when people move so fast like it
Yeah,
scares the hell out of me because
I have the same. Like it's just ick.
I just feel like it's a straight up like it is an ick to me for sure, but also like I feel like someone is just love bombing me.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I get so scared that people love bomb so hard, and it that's why I'm like from now on like I'm always like I just want to go steady. Like I know like a lot of people my age are like they're ready for marriage, they're married, they've got kids, you know, all that stuff, and like I'm not in competition with you guys to get to that level. Like I want to move steady. Like I'm not even going to be ready to move in with anyone for years. Like I want to I just want something serious, something exclusive, and it's super hard to find that, I feel like in this era. I don't know, like who knows, it could change. But I feel like people are either very casual about things or they're very much too serious, and like being too serious scares the hell out of me. Like I understand intention is important behind what you're doing, but like you don't it doesn't need to fast forward that quickly. Like I'm just it might just be because 'cause I'm very traumatized, but also, like, I feel like in general, like, people should just be aware of those things because, like, moving so fast with someone can really cause a lot of damage in the end, and you don't know someone, like, you don't know their intentions
Hmm.
until, like, it's almost too late, and I hate seeing that, like and I get it, like, when you're first dating someone, like, you sometimes you don't you want all of them all the time, like, you know,
Yeah.
it's so hard to, like, wanna be away from each other, but it's so much healthier to have the space in between, like and my only problem is I'm trying to work through that in a way that's not because I'm avoidant, because I get that way and, like, I could go like, I could date someone and, like, I could literally be in a relationship and go a very long time without seeing my significant other and feel like that's okay. And it's
Mhm.
literally just because, like, I start getting avoidant and I'm like, "I don't even want anything to do with you." But it gets really unhealthy because I start to it's all because I'm overthinking in my brain
Mhm.
that, like, it's just too much. I don't want the love bombing to happen. But I guess, you know, I it's because 'cause I'm used to it as well from, like, my childhood. Like, my dad would do abusive things or, like, my parents in general would be abusive towards me and my siblings, and then we would just pretend like nothing happened like 5 minutes later, and
Mhm.
we're all like one big happy family.
Yeah.
Like we're all doing family stuff together, and I'm like, but didn't you just like try to fuck me up like 5 minutes ago? Like,
Mhm.
as funny as it sounds, and like I know that's an experience that many people have, and they and it's so normalized in this in our society. Like, it's not okay. Like, when you have kids, like, do you plan to do that to your kids? Like, do you plan to uh scare the living shit out of them and then like 5 minutes later pretend like everything's okay? And even if you talk about it, like, I don't feel like the conversation is productive, like, giving it just 5 minutes just to give space. Like, I feel like you really need to, like, decompress
Mhm.
for a while and then actually come together and, like, talk about it, 'cause it takes I wonder if there's, like, a statistic that proves, like, how much time you should kinda take between things, but I think it goes for every like, it's different for every person.
Yeah.
But, like, that scares me because I feel like I might what if I'm that way with my kids, you know?
Yeah.
So
I think for anything, like, trust is a big thing. Like, it's one thing that shouldn't be taken, I guess, lightly in a sense where it's like, especially when you experience DV, it's like it's so hard to trust other people after like in a relationship where you need that time to actually like develop. And when they do love bomb you, it's like, okay, you're kind of developing big truck, but identifying that as like a red flag in the beginning is like something that's helpful to identify.
mhm.
Taking that time is really like it's needed just for yourself to feel safe and for that relationship just to stay healthy. And I think I know some people would sometimes respond with like, "Oh, like I'm not that person. I I'm not Joe Smith from your last relationship.
Yeah.
I'm Gary whatever. I'm
Yeah.
new, right?"
Yeah.
If people respond like that, but it's also it's like there's trauma that you've experienced and if you want to take it slow, they have to respect that.
Right.
And sometimes people don't. And I think, I guess my own personal response to that would be like with other people too. Like settling is one thing. Settling on your safety shouldn't be something you settle on.
Damn, that was a gem that you just dropped there. Okay, settling on your safety is not something to settle on. Damn, that's crazy. That's crazy. I don't want to settle at all. That's my whole thing is I don't want to settle at all in any aspect. Um, and I feel like, because I think I get a lot of my friends will be like, they'll be like, maybe you should change up your type because like clearly your type is not, they're not giving you what you want. And I'm like, well, I'm sorry that I don't compromise on certain things when it comes to like my interest in a person. But you're right, like I'm also not compromising the safety of my emotions and myself physically either. Like I will never do that to myself again. Like, and it's you know, I think I also saw as a red flag someone who says like, why am I'm always running into women who or I always meet women who have experienced domestic violence or has been like abused in some way, like whether it's sexual trauma, being stalked, or physical abuse. And I'm like, then there's probably something that's drawing that towards you. And it I'm not saying that like you are deserving of meeting someone like that, or it's just there's obviously like something unresolved within that person themselves. I know personally, like I couldn't be very close and intimate with anyone who doesn't have some type of like damaging experiences, because I feel like that's what builds character. Unfortunately, it does. Um, and I love the parts that would be considered flaws in someone. I want to love those parts of someone. And I think that but it scares me because it makes me think like maybe they're just abusive as well. Like maybe they're also like maybe they have some abusive tendencies that they haven't worked through, which is why they're so attracted to someone who might have like played who might have been in a situation that was very violent and abusive. So it I think it's very You have to be so careful and so intentional with who you allow in your life, not just romantically, but in general.
Hmm.
Um, because it's scary. It's scary out there. And I think I'm learning that now, especially like even with the podcast. Like as much as I'm very grateful like to meet certain people that are willing to come on the show and like talk about their experiences or share their experiences with me, I'm also very afraid that like their intentions aren't always the best.
Hmm.
Um like I don't know, maybe they're I don't know, exploiting on some of the things that I've been through as well,
Hmm.
you know, and it's a lot. It's a lot of fears that you always have once you go through a lot of
Yes.
trauma.
And a lot of these experiences need to be handled with like caution, more or less, handled gently. Really, I think the words I try to use, and just because these traumas and emotions are so heavy, like this is somebody like that was at their bottom point where they felt the most unsafe, they felt the most vulnerable, and when somebody's disclosing that and like just sharing that with you, it's something that should be, I guess, affirmed, but then also like comforted in a sense where like that space where you're sharing that should be safe. And I know, especially for like different like crisis lines,
Yeah.
shelters, when they have those counseling sessions, that's what they try to like to reinforce that this is a place where you are safe. Your abuser cannot like not your abuser can't affect you here.
Right.
And I know for a lot of people that are like calling these like crisis lines, it's sometimes like doing that like almost safety planning. Like, how do I call this crisis line? Because I know abusers sometimes have the password to your phone and look through your call log, look through your messages, and sometimes like, okay, I'm gonna go to the speedway to pick up some whatever, get gas, when really you're just making a call using the toll phone at the gas station.
Yeah.
And it's doing like just small things like that, just to like where you can find that safety when you're unsafe, but then also like after the fact, dealing with that trauma, dealing with that experience in a way that's one both helpful for you, where you're not like damaging yourself because you're just like
Yeah.
blowing down all this trauma, but then also reflecting on it
Yeah.
and I guess moving on, because that's something as hard as it is, it's something that is the aftermath of experiencing trauma is moving on.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like I want to say like I my whole identity revolves around my experience with domestic violence, but it played a huge role in my life and I could never I'm never going to downplay that. Um but it also has put me where I essentially where I've always been meant to be, which is here and
Mhm.
like speaking on it and like trying to bring awareness to people and like trying to make sure people are comfortable with using the resources that are available. Like it doesn't have to be just, just to come to me and like tell me your stuff, like I want people to understand that like it's always available. And
Mhm.
I think also um a lot of the people I know in my life personally that have gone through domestic violence situations or still are experiencing it, like um you know you know how people say like when you judge people it's because you're or like when you're afraid that someone's judging you it's because you're judging them.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying this in a bad way, but a lot of the time we don't give ourselves grace when we're in situations like that.
Yeah.
So we're not giving grace to other people when we see them going through those situations. So it's very, very hard because I know mentally like you're just not there for it. You're not there. But obviously everyone has their own demons to fight.
Yeah.
And you just have to like I think that's the biggest thing is learning to give yourself the grace because then it opens you up, it opens your heart up to more like empathy and like
Mhm.
understanding of other people like cuz everyone's situation is always different,
Mhm.
always different. And honestly like it's insane to me that there's people in this world that don't even make it out of these situations.
Yeah. And I think another like thing to add to that is when you deal with these situations too, because when you're in that state of crisis, when you're in, say, even if you're like drinking or on something, like that is not the time to deal with that. Sometimes it's just to focus on like maybe getting sober or focusing on the next day when you're not in crisis. Because
Yeah.
when you're in that crisis, you're focusing on only that thing that's right in front of you. You're not
Yeah.
able to make that productive step forward. So once you're out of that state, that's when you're like just doing that moving on step of like, okay, let me call the crisis line. Let me talk
Yeah.
to somebody about it. Maybe it's going to another person's house once you're like just sober and ready to like actually confront it. Because once you're in that space, you cannot like it's I guess not necessarily impossible. Like it's very very difficult to even handle a lot of those things because with that you're not thinking straight, so it's hard to even what's the word I'm looking for? Say what you're feeling, saying what you're
Process
experiencing,
it.
processing, yeah,
Yeah.
and conveying this is what's happening to me.
Yeah.
And then once you get to that point, like no, for you, you said like moving on looks like advocacy and sharing some
Yeah.
of that. But that can also be some of the also other things you're doing, like identifying red flags, identifying green flags in those relationships.
Yeah. And I think also even to think about, the whole processing things part, like because when you're going through the situation, like it's a lot, like it's a lot going on. I never thought about the substance part, like, because personally, like I've never gone through abusing any substances.
Mhm.
Um I mean, obviously, we've all had our fair share of fun in life. But I've never used substance in a way of like escaping
Mhm.
my problems, even though I guess it never dawned on me to do that, you
Yeah.
know? So that's a good thing. That's a good point to bring up because I never would have thought to be like, man, like people like don't don't try to make drastic changes or decisions when you're in a domestic violence situation while you're under the influence of any
Mhm.
substance at all. Um, I guess I never really thought about that.
Yeah. And especially too, like maybe not even like coping, but sometimes your abuser will like, okay, I'm handing you this bottle, you gotta finish it, or else like this is what happened, or like you're taking this pill with me, or whatever. And that's like another way of like them controlling you. So it's like, especially when it's stuff like that you can get like addicted to, like opioids or any other drugs, like
Yeah.
it's so hard. Like once they get you and have you in that control, it's so hard to even like deal with the aftermath of that. That leads to a whole nother aspect of like what you have to deal with because now like maybe you're you're not just making the call to the crisis center, you're also making a call to the rehab center, the crisis center.
Yeah.
So
Have you ever heard of this program? It's called CODA.
hold on, I
Yeah,
don't think so.
it's Codependencies Anonymous. I've talked about it a couple times on the podcast, but um I thought it might be a good resource maybe for you and what and the field
Mm-hmm.
that you're in. So it's just like Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's for codependency and what's crazy is like I feel like there's so many people in this world that walk around codependent. I mean, I know I'm still codependent to a certain extent, and I'm trying to break that codependency and earn myself a secure attachment. Um, but I feel like codependency is probably one of the biggest like that's a good starting point to kind of getting yourself to a healthier space to never put yourself in to not put yourself in more violent
Mm-hmm.
situations. And it doesn't have to be domestic violence. Like I think just in general, how you interact with the world as a person, it the codependency meetings could truly help. And like I mean, I know it takes a lot even to get people to speak up about their DV, but maybe because it's actually like a nonprofit organization and you guys maybe could even look into it and see if it's something that you guys would even find interest in like advocating for and like bringing it as a resource for the people that you work with.
Mm-hmm.
Because I honestly I didn't even think about it as far as like my DV situation, but just I was like, why am I so like I'm like something's just gotta change for me in general. Like I don't know, like this is just getting to be too much. But I personally wanted to bring those programs to like the inner city because we don't really have a lot of those meetings in the inner city.
Mm-hmm.
Um they're mostly, like, on the outskirts of town, and, from the meetings that I've gone through or gone to, it's mostly, like, older white men,
Mhm.
and I'm like, people if I brought this to, like, inner city community centers where there's actually, like not saying that it
Mhm.
doesn't happen to, like, white people, but,
Yeah.
like, it's definitely more prominent and, like, much more violent in the inner cities, like,
Mhm.
the, um with the communities that I grew up in, like, it could definitely change some things. I mean, the first step is admitting that you need that help,
Mhm.
right? But I know that's a lot harder, but, of course, like, for anyone who's very serious and, like, actually at that point of, like, trying to leave a domestic violence situation, like, that could be an additional thing that they could kind of go through.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like, I kinda just thought of that because we were talking about substance abuse and
Yeah.
whatnot. Because man, if there's if there's things for substance abuse, there should be things like that for mental, like mental illnesses of sorts, you
Mhm.
know? Um, and what's crazy is, like, some of the men that were there were actual, like, abusers.
Mhm.
So that kinda scared me. So that's kinda why, like,
Yeah.
I stopped going. But that is something to keep in mind as well.
No. I
I'm gonna
think the world of just, like, DV homelessness is so, like, layered in the sense that there's, like one of the things I do with a lot of the people I work with are a thing called eco maps, which pretty much gives to like a social work tool, a little toolbox, and it's pretty much relating yourself to your not only your interpersonal but intrapersonal uh surrounding
Mhm,
pretty much. So okay, I'm experiencing outlines what your stresses are in your life, what your supports are in your life,
mhm,
and sometimes clients don't know like what am I experiencing, and it's just like circles and circles of what they're experiencing. Like sometimes it's identifying, okay, I have DV with this person and this is a stress, but I also worry about how my children are in school and a co-parenting, and that could be a whole nother scenario. And let's say like, oh, another thing is in recovery. I'm
mm,
also looking for housing, but I have an eviction, I have background,
yeah,
and like sometimes just identifying and actually having a visual representation is so helpful to actually like understand, okay, this is all what's happening on my life currently. I guess not everything, but like all on a piece of paper, and I can actually visually see like how this connects to myself.
yeah.
So,
I think also the hardest part is, like, being honest with yourself.
yeah.
'Cause, like, once you're actually honest with yourself, that's when you're like, "Yeah, I'm actually done with this, like, I really wanna get out of this situation." But I know being honest with yourself is like, it takes a lot to get to
Yeah.
that point, like
And that progress is slow sometimes, and but that progress and taking those little baby steps is what gets you there.
yeah, yeah, and I'm grateful that I didn't ever go down a path of, like, substance abuse because that could be such a huge contributing factor to, people not ever making it out of a
Hmm.
situation alive. But also even, one thing I've always, like, been super grateful for is the fact that I've always been able to maintain, like, a good job and, like, I was able to, like, at least build some type of career path.
Hmm.
And, when I look at other not that I compare myself, but when I look at other people who've experienced, domestic violence situations, they do not like, they're not able to even, like, maintain a job or,
Hmm.
even have a career of any sorts because their abuser was controlling every single thing. Or even if even if even if they're not, like, literally there controlling where you're going and when you're going, the fact that they do certain things like, I don't know, pick an argument with you or, like, my abuser would, like if I'm sleeping, um, he would be up, like, all night and stuff, doing whatever he's doing, talking to other girls, I don't
Hmm.
know, whatever. And, like, in the middle of the night, like, in the middle of my sleep, he'll, like, mess with me, like, he'll throw things at me, like, it may be, like, small stuff,
Hmm.
or he'll just do little things to, like, scare me out of my sleep,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't be able to go back to sleep because now I'm scared, and now I'm, like,
Hmm.
totally flustered. And so because I'm not getting a proper amount of sleep, I'm not performing my best at work, or like I can't go to work.
Yeah.
And it could be 10 times worse for other people, and to think about that is also such an insane thing because like I'm like, man, I really when I look at my situation, I literally am like, I made it out. I made it out, my situation wasn't even as bad as it was. But that's also me like trying to downplay what actually really happened to me.
Mhm.
And I think I hear that a lot when I talk to people about their situations, is like they feel like they didn't actually go through too much. But I think it's just because they're still working through processing what actually happened to them and how badly it does affect them. And I think part of the healing process definitely has to do with being completely honest with yourself about what's happened, because if you don't accept that ugly part of it, like you're just you're just going to keep avoiding it and never process and work through those emotions yourself.
Mhm.
And it can get really ugly. And you're just going to like kind of go down the same cycle again and not realize it.
Mhm. And I think a lot of people come to the point where it's almost like they're numb by the situation they're in, where like they're kind of just experiencing it just because they feel like they're stuck there, and the abuse is almost reinforced that they're stuck there. They have
Yeah.
control of them, and sometimes it leads to like it's almost a lifetime thing,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And sometimes it comes to the point where abusers kill the victims, and that's I guess in my work that's like where it hurts like the most, where it's like
Mhm.
especially when you're able to identify these things, it's like I think as providers, all we can really do is say, "Hey, I see you're experiencing this,
Yeah.
and like when you are ready for that help, we are here for you." And
Yeah.
we always tell them like, "Do not hesitate to reach out. We
Yeah.
want you to reach out. We want to help you, especially when identified." Because the worst thing to experience is seeing your client pass, especially if it's related to violence. It's like it like, but unfortunately, it happens like a lot, like
Yeah.
or at least not, I guess, related for like TV related, but also like in my experience with being like the homosexual, like
Almost. Yeah.
sometimes people are on the street and like, oh, he died last week because it's cold. We're in Wisconsin, like
Yeah.
our winters are not the easiest. So,
Right. That's insane. I I'm grateful enough that like I didn't get to that point, of course, and
mhm,
like I personally haven't met anyone that has gotten to, well, I did see some of like I did see an experience like that as a kid. Someone a little bit more distant, like my
mhm,
first cousin, um like basically had like an ex-girlfriend that he still was friends with, and
mhm,
she was actually murdered because of a domestic violence situation
yeah,
after they had broken up and whatnot. And like because they were still so close, and like she was still close with like his sister and everything, it like hit my family kind of hard. But just knowing like situations like that could still like just happen, like I don't know if that even gets reported out as often anymore. Like I mean, I also don't really watch the news, and I feel like at least my algorithm on the internet doesn't really bring me across like news like
mhm,
that. But to think of that is crazy because I almost didn't make it out of my own situation, not just because he was violent to me and like he's threatened my life, and like I've been dragged out of a car, like I've been gun pointed to my head multiple times, like but more so like even my own thoughts.
mhm,
Like I've always struggled with like suicidal thoughts and tendencies as a kid, and like to be in that terrible of a situation,
mhm,
damn well that was like the first thought I had going through my mind was like, if he doesn't take my life, I'm taking my own life. It just is like your mind goes to places that it should never go because the manipulation has gotten to that point.
mhm,
And it kind of like it's very disheartening to know that there's people out there that can't fight that battle.
yeah,
And like I can only imagine. I think what hurts more is, like, knowing that a lot of these people have kids with their abusers.
Hmm.
I just
I think one of the things I've confronted with that too is like sometimes if, let's say, you're the victim and you're out of the house, but your abuser still has your child, it's like in terms of how do you co-parent, that becomes a big like question of like, okay, I think like, do I try to get my kid out of there, have him with me, or like do they have custody of him? And it's like sometimes that legal process of who has custody of the child, and it just becomes so difficult because when you're the victim, it's like your abuser has almost like control of your child. It's like
Yeah,
if you do something, since they've caused harm to you, are they going to cause harm to your child?
right.
That just becomes a thought, and that is like a realistic possibility and something like that is considered, especially like when it comes to like safety planning. That's like who you're trying to keep safe, and that sometimes extends to your child, other loved one, like maybe a new significant other that you have. So,
So, when a victim is going through, like, let's say, these programs and these,
mhm,
through these uh, yeah, basically going through these programs to start speaking to someone and, like, actually, um start the process of, like, safety planning and, like, trying to essentially find their escape, right? And let's say, like, they still go back to their abuser, let's say, and, they have kids or something, and, um, if they're putting this plan into motion and well, basically, my question is just, like, um, let's say they do go back, right?
yeah,
And then something happens with the abuser where, I don't know, maybe they get into another argument, another physical fight or something, and then the cops are called again. Have you guys had to be put in situations where you've had to, like, I don't know, testify in court or, like, provide court documentation? Or does
I
anything that you do at the, like, I don't know if you can answer this question, but anything you do at the agency level that is going to help your
yeah,
person advocate for themselves in the law?
I specifically have never gone through any of those situations, but I think that would definitely be a better question for like a DVHC person. But
Sure.
I think some of the things like in terms of like as case management or when you talk to somebody at crisis line, when you start doing some of that safety planning,
Mhm.
a lot of it's going to be like what can you do for yourself, and obviously legal advocacy could be a part of that as well.
Mhm.
Um, but some of it, it's like I don't want to just say simple things, but like some of the things you think of, like having a go bag, having your phone, having your charger, like your necessities that you need, like where you can just pick up and go.
Yeah.
But that can also be knowing who are your safe contacts, who are your unsafe contacts, who should you let know where you're at, who should you let know, because sometimes you let, okay, I let my brother know that I was here, but then your brother talks to your abuser's cousin and your cousin tells it. So like
Yeah.
like information can get out that easily sometimes, and just being aware of, okay, like if I do tell this person, they cannot tell this to anybody else because
Yeah.
it puts your own self at a risk of safety.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, I should ask someone, like, more in a DV
Yeah.
shelter, because, like, I just wonder that, like, because you know how, so, like, one thing about, like, even when I was going through my stalker situation, it was like you have to have, like, a lot of, like, all the times that you report things or you call the police about things, like, do those things actually, like, even if they're just there to take a simple report, like,
Mhm.
is it really going to add up in the end? Because, like, for me, like, the stalking situation, like, none of it was things that could result in pressing
Mhm.
charges. And when it finally came to the results of pressing charges, like, it was everything else didn't even matter. Like, all those other times I called the police and, like, reported to them, like, he's violated the restraining order, da 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 da.
Mhm.
They were just like, you can't prove it. And I just wonder if, like, it got to a point where a person who was going through DV and they got to the point where they were like, okay, this time, like, I'm actually pressing charges. All these times that I've gone to the shelter, I've talked to someone, I've gone to an advocate. Like, I'm sure that the actually, now that I think about it, yes, the advocate does have some. They are able to still weigh in on a legal situation.
Yeah. I know sometimes too, it's also like mandatory reporting. Like,
Yeah.
especially when there's a child involved, that could be a big thing where it's like,
Yes.
okay, as an advocate, I had to disclose this to whether it's like CPS or if there's like a situation at the shelter too. Like sometimes it's just reporting that. Like 'cause sometimes there's like incident reports that we do, and like, okay, and I know even for like intakes at like different shelters, I'm not sure what it would look like if it's different at a DV shelter, but sometimes we have them like sign like, "Hey, am I able to disclose this?" Like, let's say if you're in a medical emergency, I'm able to give your information out to the first responders.
Mm,
Sometimes it's like, okay, this person's actually caused a big disturbance at the shelter. I need the police to actually have them like removed from the shelter for at least like maybe the day or however it might be. So I think that those are some situations where, as like an advocate or a support services worker, we'd get involved.
that makes sense. Yeah, that definitely does. Now that, yeah, good to talk about that. Good point, good point. But
Yeah.
yeah, even the safety planning, like that's insane. Like I mean, obviously I had to have a safety plan because I was in a stalker situation. But then I also had a safety plan of my own with my domestic violent partner, and even talking to some people like they didn't they didn't even think that far ahead, you know.
Hmm.
Like they weren't thinking like, "Oh, like this is me. I'm going to be ready to leave if something happens." Like
Hmm.
basically, and I call them explosions. Like basically if an
Yeah.
explosion happens, like this is me leaving. And I've had to do that, of course, numerous times. And I had dogs when I was like they were my dogs, not his.
Hmm.
And there were times where I've had to leave my dogs because like and that's also why like I had a really hard time adopting these guys because like I mean I knew I wasn't going to go through a situation like that again because I would never put myself in a situation like that again, but I just felt so traumatized having to give up my dogs because it wasn't safe for them because I just couldn't leave him at that point still. But like he did so much to my dogs. Like he's literally choked my dogs to the
Hmm.
point like they're crying and screaming, and like he's dangled them over like our two-story like my two-story balcony, and like he's thrown them against the walls and like all types of shit. Like then he would like push me out of my own apartment and lock me out so that I couldn't grab them
Hmm.
and leave with them because he knew I wasn't going to go anywhere unless I had my dogs. And it's like a manipulation tactic. He
Yeah.
used them as like something to hold over me. And it was, it's small stuff like that. And I know that doesn't even compare to having kids,
Yeah.
but I could only imagine how it would have been if I did have a kid with him. Like, he probably, I know like the way that he would move is just like if things would have to go legal obviously at that point.
Hmm.
And he would probably try to paint me as like a terrible mom and like make me look as if like I'm incapable of raising my child. And that's a very unfortunate part of like having to co-parent with an abuser.
Hmm.
And I couldn't imagine myself having to go through that.
Yeah. And I think especially when you're going to like shelter, one of
Mm,
the things too, it's like if you have custody of your kids in the shelter and like you one day have to like, because those are sometimes only temporary solutions, you have to go back to the street. Sometimes in that case, like CPS is called or reported, and custody will end up going to the abuser, unfortunately, just because they have housing and you do not.
that's crazy. That is always, oh my God. See, that's why I don't
Yeah.
think I could work
And
in
yeah,
the
it's definitely
field.
difficult. But also there's other things too where maybe the child goes to foster care, which is not also a great solution, but sometimes that's also a better solution than them going to back to your abuser.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this situation. I don't even think I've ever talked about it on the podcast yet, but I wanted to get more perspective of like abuse, like in my like that I've
Hmm.
seen in my life. So, um, a lot of people don't know this, but my sister actually, um, so the reason I have this house is because, the reason I co-purchased it with my mom is because, when I was like 18, my sister's kids, like my sister lost custody of her kids, and my parents like stepped up and fostered them.
Hmm.
And eventually, like, my parents just, like, essentially adopted them. And so, because my sister was in a very violent situation, and, like, my nephews and niece were being abused. So she had 3 kids from, like, her previous relationship, and then she had 1 with her abuser. And even her previous relationship was very abusive as well, like, uh, a lot of my life, like, I lived with my sisters, and, like, we were also very lucky because my parents owned a lot of houses, so when my sister wasn't able to, like, afford a place of her own, like, my parents would let us, like, live in one of the houses, and, like, I would just live there with her, and, like, I've seen some stuff, like, that went down with her and her ex, and then, like, literally, I came home one day from school, and, like, there's a fat ass hole in my door of my room, and my room is normally locked, but my sister, I guess, she, like, ran in my room, and, like, her baby daddy, like, threw a fucking axe at the door. So, yeah, I had a
Yeah.
hole in my fucking door, but, like, so the incident that happened when I was, like, 18, it had the kids get taken out of her care,
Hmm.
and essentially for good, and, like, my parents, like, obviously have not that they've just wanted that to happen, but they kind of, like, they see the patterns, they saw what was going on, and it's not like my parents were any healthier, um, but obviously, like, they were more stable in a lot of ways, and so at this time, like, my dad was he was first diagnosed with his tumor, and then also, like, the kids were going through this, and he's like, "Well, I'm still gonna take them in." Like, my dad, like, really encouraged my mom to, like, take them in, and, um, my mom, like, my parents were they were about to be child free. Like, I just turned 18. Like, they're
Hmm.
like, "Our baby's gone." Like, and honestly, like, I didn't really live at home, like I said, for a very long time, like, for almost, like, my entire teenagehood. Like, I
Hmm.
didn't live at home. Um, and so, like, the kids move in, and, they go through, like, this entire thing, and, like, up until, like, now, like, the youngest he's just 12. So, this is why we have the house, because, after my dad passed away, we had to get out of the because we were from pretty, bad part of the city, so and also, like, to escape my abuser, like, my mom sold the house, and we ended up, eventually buying this one, and then, this is essentially gonna be like home base for them, anytime that they want or need anything, just like it always has been, is like it's always home base for everyone.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, I think also in, like, our culture, like, a lot of people, like, always circle back, like, to live together as a whole family. But, like, I always told them, like, I'm not your mom, but, like, I'm always gonna try my best to be there for you guys. Um And, like, after I got out of that relationship, I kinda took a lot of time to, like, focus on, like, my family again, and, like, but then I started to avoid, like, what was really going on inside my head, and, like, actually facing, like, what was causing me, like, trauma, and I became more selfish with my time, and, like, the 3 older ones, like, they're all 18 and up now,
Hmm.
so I don't even actually have to they like, I don't have to take care of them anymore, nor does my mom. But, after my dad passed away and I was finally out of that relationship, I just felt like it was kind of my place as the only child who didn't have other obligations, like, to kinda, like, step up and be there for my family in this time, um, because I think, like, their relationship with their mom, I feel like will always be strained in some way, but I'm happy that, like, they're working through it, and I've always encouraged that, like, I always want that for them,
Hmm.
and even with her, like, when she was going through a lot of stuff, like, I was going through an abusive relationship, but when she needed somewhere to go and stay, I still offered her, like, as much help as I could. Money, I literally took her to go bail him out one time, like, I've I even let her like, shower and stuff at my house, like,
Hmm.
I couldn't let her stay because, like, my abusive ex wasn't like, he didn't like her, and
Yeah.
he wanted to control everything, but anytime, even if I'm going through something, like, I always open the door for her, and, like, it was difficult to watch her go through that, and, like, I was being so judgmental of her. Like literally, we fist fought because I'm like, "Bitch, you're still with him." Like, and like it was so bad. Like, cause I wasn't giving her grace, but that was also because I wasn't giving myself grace either. I
Yeah.
was still staying with my abuser, and she was too. So why am I any better? You know, like I wasn't, I wasn't being that great of a person, and
Yeah.
I'd be telling her the same shit I should be telling myself. And like it was always a lot, like, going on around me, and like um but that's kind of why like I'm in the situation that I'm in, and like watching my sister go through that, and like having my parents foster her kids, it's a very sad situation, but I'm very grateful and lucky that like my parents are who they are, cuz so many kids fall into the foster care,
Yeah.
like they fall into foster care and no one ever finds them again. Like I personally know people like who don't know their siblings, like where their siblings are.
Hmm.
Like like my nieces, like the kids that have been living with my mom for the last, you know, 11 years, like they have siblings or cousins on their dad's side who fell into foster care because, their dad was murdered, and like their mom was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and she uh like there were three of them, and like it's almost impossible for them to like find each other, but through social media, and as they got older, like they're able to connect that way, but it's still not the same, and even they go through, like seeing them go through like mental illnesses from the things that they've experienced through foster care and like their childhood. It I can only imagine how traumatizing it is. Like, I fear for my nephews and nieces, or my nephews and niece, that like that'll be something that'll continue to happen. But they're pretty good kids though. Like they got their shit together. They're
That's
working a
good.
lot now. They've got their own place, and like they still include their little brother and everything, and
Hmm.
like they're still super loving of like each other even though they are scared of their feelings. Um,
Yeah.
they're really good kids for like 20-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 19-year-old, and an 18-year-old. Like they have their shit together. They've got a car, they've got a place of their own, and like I
Hmm.
know a lot of it has to do with like the privileges of like having the family that we have, but also, like to know what they actually went through. Like I'm proud that like even though I played the smallest part in it, like I'm proud to know like they actually have their shit together after all of this. But yeah, that's my personal experience with
Yeah.
seeing people go through DV and like losing custody of their kids, because it's hard. It's a hard
Definitely.
watch for sure.
Well, one thing I wanted to transition to was, I guess, identifying and like having those conversations towards, I guess, whether it's like loved ones, friends, of like identifying and asking those questions. Are you in this situation, and do you want to have this conversation of domestic violence?
Mm,
Because I think that first step before you even like reach out to like a victim services agency is acknowledging it, because that's how you get to that first phone call, that first visit, going to that resource fair, community fair, whatever it may be, to getting that help to getting out of your situation,
yeah.
whatever that might be. And so some of the things I personally like ask for my clients or guests are, and simple. One of the things we ask is like, are you a victim of domestic sexual violence or human trafficking? Because all that like domestic violence is not just like in your relationship, but that can also be sexual abuse, human trafficking, because that is a reality of the world we live in.
Mm,
Um, and if that answer is yes, like when was the last experience? Is this recent? Was this in the past when you were younger? 'Cause that can all play a factor too. Of like, okay, this person's experienced it, but they're out of it at that point. After that, let's say like if it's recent, and sometimes are you currently fleeing that domestic violence? Sometimes it's no, sometimes it's yes. And if it's yes, we try to figure out like what their situation is. And I guess also fleeing can be identified. It's more like almost like self-reported in a sense, where it's like you make the decision, yes, I'm trying to flee the situation, or no, I'm not fleeing this situation at the moment. And moving past that, it's like that attempts of how many times have you left your or tried to leave or attempted to leave your situation.
Mhm.
And attempts are also like in that like self-reported category. It's like of sometimes it's as simple as like, okay, I have my I today I packed my go bag, but I couldn't get that effort to like leave the
Mhm.
door, leave that space, because let's say like you have nowhere to go. I wasn't able to get into shelter that day. It's cold outside. I had a bad day today. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah.
Um, but that's all that like there's steps that like you said there's on average it's 7 times to
Mhm.
actually like leave your situation. So small steps is what we small steps towards leaving is what we ask. But
Yeah.
identifying how many times is always a good like thing to ask just because we know like how like recent it is more or less.
Yeah.
Um what's the next I'm trying to think of like I'm just like, going through my intake at the moment of what's another thing we ask. If like especially for since I'm like specifically related to homelessness,
Mhm.
since I don't not necessarily like a provider for DV specifically,
Yeah.
um one thing we ask is do you want a referral to a DV agency? Because sometimes like agencies have connections with other agencies, like
Right,
and
right.
we're always happy to like if we cannot provide a service, we know somebody that does.
Yeah.
And one of those things is DV. It's like, okay, I might not be the best person to handle this, but they're the professionals, they can handle this to the best extent.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's, I am not a counselor, I am not uh legal advocacy, I cannot be your advocate for these things, but they are. Um and then additionally we go in our assessment that we have, we go a little deeper sometimes too, like of how unsafe or safe your situation is. So one of the things we ask is, are there any point in time has your abuser like made you or force you to like sell whether it's yourself, drugs, um, to make some sort of like money. So like it's like prostitution in a way. Another thing we would ask is, has this person caused you bodily harm? Has this person made comments saying that they'll kill themselves, you, family members, pets, anybody that has meaning to you? Like that is like another way we identify domestic violence.
Yeah.
Let me try. I know there's a few more. Wait a second. What's another thing? Does this person have access to a weapon?
Mm,
Like that's
yes.
another identifier of like
Heard that a lot.
if this person has access to a weapon, we want to make sure you are safe. So it's like something we want to know, like in what ways can we identify danger? So then that can also lead to like, okay, so now that we identified this, how can we make this into your safety plan?
Yeah.
So that's like, I guess that there's a lot of questions you guys need to like. It's questions you don't really think of when you're like in the moment, but those are questions that try to we use to identify what are your needs, how can we safety plan better to your specific situation because all situations are different. So it's a lot in that.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I do remember hearing that a lot. And it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause honestly, small stuff can really develop really quickly. Like, even using my stalker situation as an example. My stalker is an ex of mine, and like
Mm-hmm.
eventually, like his new girlfriend, actually baby mama,
Mm-hmm.
reached out to me and like I I was with my abusive ex at the time and he controlled everything. So he saw the messages before I even did.
Mm-hmm.
Years later, like a year ago, I mean, I read these messages are from like almost 10 years ago. I read the messages from her and she was basically telling me about how he would make her sell her body for money. And I was just appalled because like yeah, he did things to me that like were abusive and like the reason that were legitimate for the restraining order, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But I did not realize that he would get to that point with another person. And I'm like, I'm glad that I took the legal actions of getting a restraining order, but it also didn't really, like, how else could I have stopped that from happening, you know? And like,
Mm-hmm.
I had carried that guilt for a really long time. And I'm like, if I had just done my part and like stopped it then, maybe she wouldn't have gone through that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy to think like, you know, sometimes there's small abusive tendencies that they'll do that are essentially a gateway for them to exploit you in other ways.
Yeah.
And I am like as grateful as I am that that was not me, like it's very unfortunate that like she had to go through that. And but yeah, I'm glad that you shared that because I think it's important for people to like also understand that like you don't need to think about these just because you're going into an intake center, you know, like you need to
Yeah.
think about this just in general. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
this is essentially free resources for you to like
Yes.
try to plan your escape from this situation. And like honestly, um like I listened to this podcast called Crime Junkie,
Mm-hmm.
and they talk more about like true crime and stuff like, and they have this document that's called If I Go Missing. And it's like it's something like safe that you keep with very specific people, like someone that you trust won't
Mm-hmm.
abuse the information. And I think that it's something safe to also keep in mind even in a domestic violence situation, um because anything could happen to you,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's unfortunate. Like you anything could happen. So having that in general could help as well. Um I used it more like I use it more for like me solo traveling. I want to make sure like I'm safe. But had I also flipped it in a way of like domestic violence, because like when a lot of the time, like very violent situations happen in intimate relationships, you know? And not saying that when you go out in the world, you could not be put in danger. You could, absolutely. But most of the time, you experience a lot of violence within your actual like intimate life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be your partner, could be your friends, could be your roommates,
Yeah.
could be your family. Like, you've got to have stuff that like kind of solidifies some sort of plan for you. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's hard because like not everyone has someone that they trust or
Yeah.
know will not say anything. And especially when you're in an abusive relationship, like they will manipulate you to the point where you don't even trust anyone because they
Yeah.
say so. I didn't know who to trust. Like, you know, I couldn't even trust my best friend that I've known since 3rd grade. But it wasn't her. Like, it was never her the whole time. But you don't know that, you know, because he's got you so heavily wrapped
Mm-hmm.
around his finger. Like, I think just, you know, I would leave little stuff like that laying around in different places. Or, um, I don't know, like I would just do like little stuff like that. Like I'll hide little things like that in like, I don't know, my mom's house.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. The light died now. Or like I'd call my sister in LA and tell her very subtle things like, "Hey, just so you know, if something happens to me, like I have a life insurance policy
Mm-hmm.
at this place and that place." So like, you know, if
Yeah.
he ever, God forbid, killed me, like she knew where to find those things. So, um, but I were there any other things that you wanted to talk about or bring up at all?
Yeah. I literally just had in my mind. One thing is some of these resources, like especially for like some of the crisis lines, sometimes it doesn't have to be you. Like if you're worried about like a loved one or a friend, like you can reach out to the like those crisis lines as well to like, hey, I need advice on this, and like that's a good way to like get those resources to that person. And sometimes like it's difficult to start those conversations, but sometimes the best way to start those conversations is like head first, like being direct with it. Like, is this the situation that you're in? Are you experiencing domestic violence? As direct that is, like sometimes that's what people need to hear. It's like to actually for them to think about it. Like sometimes like people will tiptoe if they're in a situation that feels uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But when you're direct with it, the other person understand like can feel that like okay, this person like this is a person I love. This is a person that I find identify as safe, and they're confronting me about something that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But they also understand like they're worried about you. And
Yeah.
that's the best way sometimes is to making that call to those victim services and to receive that advice so you can hand it on to your other loved one.
Yeah.
I had a number. Some I just want to say like just a few numbers really quick. So like
Yeah.
I guess what I use one great use is like just more of like a directory of different services is Impact Connect 211. So it's
Okay.
like literally on your phone dial 211. That's like a great way to just get connected with resources, whether
Oh,
in
nice.
Milwaukee, or outside of like Milwaukee, so like in rural areas even too, like Impact 211 can help you get connected. And there's just a connection to other resources, really.
Yeah.
Um, Additionally, there's like the national hotlines for domestic violence. Let me find it really quick.
The hotline, right?
Yes.
I have it.
Let's see.
It's 800-799-7233.
Yep.
Yep. And then you can also text begin to 88788, or you can go to their website, thehotline.org, and chat with someone there. I actually did that because I was scared he would find like the text
Mhm.
messages. And I use the hotline, and honestly, it doesn't even have to be because you're like trying to escape. Like literally, you just use it as a resource to figure out like,
Yeah.
are you actually going through this experience? Like,
Mhm.
and it helps you just kind of process what's going on in the moment.
Yeah. And don't ever feel like bad to like reach out to these resources. Like as providers, we want to reach out to you. We want to hear what you're going through and how figure out what the best way we can go about your situation and help you out. Because that is literally our jobs. Like
Yeah.
we want you to come access services. Because that's like I know a lot of like different agencies like want to like end pretty much like domestic violence, end homelessness, and drug abuse, anything else like that is like literally our goal. So it's
Yeah.
like reach out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think it's always fear and
Yeah,
shame in reaching out for help, but it's okay to
yeah,
because you have to.
yeah. Especially in those situations, like you want to affirm you in those feelings, like because DV is nothing anybody should be experiencing, but it just is.
Yeah.
And to be in a situation where you're feeling unsafe, you're shameful, embarrassed, we will take you as you are, and we will deal with those emotions as much as we will deal with your situation.
Yeah. And this is probably not the healthiest advice, but I always say, like, they're already making you feel your worst.
Hmm.
So, are you really going to feel any worse by talking to someone that can actually help you with the right resources
Yeah,
to get out of those situations? Like there is no there is no more shame in that. Like cuz it's shame in being abused and being treated less than
mm,
what you deserve. So, just speak up.
yeah,
Like, no one needs to know either. No one needs to know what
yes.
what you're going through outside of people who can actually get you back on your feet.
Hmm.
People who can actually give you the healthy resources.
Hmm. And even as like, even if you're embarrassed, like maybe your information's gonna go out. Like a lot of like pretty much every domestic violence every agency, I would not be surprised, has some form of like confidentiality policy that all of their advocates sign
Yeah.
when they are hired. It's like they every agency takes that seriously, regardless of where you're at. We will keep all your information to ourselves. We will not leave our agency. Outside of like mandatory reporting, that's a little different. And you can always ask too if you ever talk to somebody, are you a mandatory reporter and what can I share with you?
Mhm.
And that's just another way like you are an understanding of what maybe not to share with an advocate, and then maybe they can refer you to somebody that's not a mandatory reporter. So
Right.
there's so many different like ways you can take this, but reaching out for help is always the first step.
Absolutely. Identifying that
Yes,
you're in a
identifying,
situation and
then
then
reaching out
reaching out
for
for
help.
help is
Yes,
definitely where to start. But yeah, it was good to have you on. And you brought a lot of good resources and
yes,
insight from like point of views that I I would never have thought.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad that you did actually come on and like share that. Um, and for anyone who's going through things like we said, please use the resources that we had. I'm gonna put all of it in the show notes. But you know, I just I really hope that this
Yeah.
gets to the right people. Because even if you're no longer in the situation, I think using these resources to identify how you can heal from it,
Mm-hmm.
that's the bigger part. And I think we can't forget the bigger picture, which is to heal
Yeah.
from this. So please make sure to read those resources because I actually still read stuff on the hotline website as well. Like I was looking at some statistics that they have on there, just facts that you should know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, thanks again, Xavier.
Yes.
It's me, Sab, again. Another episode of Suffering of Silence, and I will talk to Oh, make sure you follow on TikTok and Instagram. I feel so weird saying that after having like super serious conversations. But make sure you follow on TikTok and Instagram at Suffering of Silence Pod. And then of course, like I'm on YouTube, I'm on all streaming platforms, and episodes will be back to regular scheduled every other Friday after the end of this month. So thanks again so much, and thanks for being subscribers.